Hola y bienvenidos. Welcome to this episode of We're Moving to Europe, a podcast for Americans who are curious and or serious about relocating to a European country. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. My young adult children and I all moved from Texas to different countries in Europe over the past few years, and my hope now is to help other Americans who want to move to Europe to plan and execute their research effectively so you can find the right fit without stressing out, wasting money, or losing time. Today's topic is moving internationally by yourself or especially with a child, how to manage logistics for school and healthcare, how to prepare your family for a new culture and new social life, and how to make it a successful experience. Our guest today is Emily Omier. She is an internationally recognized open source consultant, host of the Business of Open Source podcast, organizer of the Open Source Founders Summit in Paris, and the mother of a 9-year-old daughter. So welcome, Emily. Thank you for making time to talk with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about your background? I know that you are living in Paris now, but France is not the first international move you've made. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your history of international living?
Sure. So I'm originally from Oregon, and I lived in Switzerland for a year when I was in high school. I did like a high school exchange, and I did a study abroad program for a year in Russia. And I stayed for like an academic year, and then I worked in a bar over the summer. Then after college, I moved to Spain. I lived there for 2 years, and I taught English. I then moved to New York City. Lived there for a little while, went to graduate school, and then went to graduate school in Paris as well. I moved back to Oregon for a while, spent 6 months in China on a Confucius Institute scholarship. I'm actually not sure if it still exists, but it was a scholarship funded by the Chinese government for studying Chinese. And then my daughter was born. I went to live in Nicaragua with her, and then moved back to Oregon again, and have now been in France for almost 2 years.
So that's a lot. That's a lot of moving around. And how was it, especially, I mean, can you kind of walk us through what it was like moving with your daughter at different stages in her life? Like, what were the big logistical considerations?
So when we moved to Nicaragua, this was a very, very different situation. So my late husband, my daughter's father, died when she was 2 months old, and he was Nicaraguan. And so I moved to Nicaragua because I had hoped for her to grow up at least a portion of her childhood there. And when we moved there, she was a year and a half. So when a kid is a year and a half, like they don't really have any say in what's going on in their life in any way, shape, or form. So there wasn't really much to do, except there was a bunch of paperwork for her in order to get her like Nicaraguan paperwork, and also for me to get my paperwork. And it ended up not being possible for us to stay in Nicaragua for as long as I had hoped. But so that was what it was like when she was very little. And then we moved to France when she was 7. And that was just more complicated because a 7-year-old has very different emotional needs than a toddler. So yeah, I guess that's the main difference, and then it would be different if we were moving again when she was older.
Yeah. So what was that like? Just maybe in general, without giving away too much of, your daughter's personal stuff. What was it like having those conversations, like preparing her for the move? Did you present it as a choice or a done deal? Like, how did you have that series of conversations with her about the move to France?
Oh, I mean, it was never a choice. It was just like, this is what we're going to do. So she was very nervous about it. On the other hand, she is, I think, actually quite a bit happier here in France than she was when we were living in Oregon. So really, it's in many ways, I would say it's worked out for her, if that makes sense. But she was very nervous about it. She was very nervous about not speaking French. She was very nervous about having to make friends and leaving, the life that she was used to. I think it was also harder for her than I anticipated that it would be. I don't plan to move again, and part of it is because I'm not eager to do that to her again. But I would do it again in the sense that I think that we made the right choice to move to France. But it was more challenging for her emotionally than I expected.
So I wonder if, when you're talking about that, and especially learning the language and making friends. And of course, when you're in a new country, learning the language is part of what allows you to make those stronger friendship connections. Can you talk a little bit about like what the language learning process for her was like? Because I think that's one of the big trepidations that a lot of parents have about moving to a new country, but then they also get told a lot of things like, oh, well, it's super easy for kids to pick up a new language, no problem. So I'm guessing the reality is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, the reality is somewhere in the middle. So, in the case of France, the French public school system has special classes for children who are non-francophone, who come to France, and they're not in every single school. But they're if you live in a place that's dense enough, like if you were to move to the middle of nowhere in France, you wouldn't have this. But in a place like Paris, there'll be a school in proximity to wherever you live that has a class that's specially for kids who are learning French. And this is good for two reasons. One, it means that the kids have a softer landing, but two, it creates a cohort effect for the child. So that the kid is in this class with 10 to 20 other kids who are going through the same experience, which is an ideal situation for creating social bonds, which is part of why I would say my daughter's social life is much more interesting, and she has a lot more really good friends now than she did when we were in Oregon, because she was able to really bond with a number of the kids that were in this class. And, you know, wherever you go, sometimes this will be the case and sometimes it won't. But the result was even not in even the kids that had gone through this class but then stayed at the school. There's a lot of children that have had sort of a similar experience to my daughter, and I think that has helped her enormously socially.
Right. Just knowing that there are other people who've had that same kind of experience and have the same context
Mhm.
for understanding what's going on. So I don't know really anything at all about how childhood education works in France. So is your daughter attending public schools or private school? Like, how does that?
My daughter's going to the public school.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was a resource that was available through the public school. So did you have a waiting period or anything before you were able to enroll her?
No, no, no.
Okay.
So school systems are definitely different. And also in my daughter's case, because of when her birthday is, she essentially skipped a grade. And this worked out fine. And I actually didn't realize it was happening at the beginning. And then once she was sort of in the class, I actually checked in with it and I realized what had happened. I checked in with the teacher, and the teacher was like, no, she's doing fine. So that's just also something to be aware of, is that every school system has a different cutoff date. And it could be that your child ends up doing the equivalent of either like repeating a grade or skipping a grade. And if that bothers you, you should just be aware that it's happening.
I was going to ask if, like, what is the culture of like parent teacher conferences like there? Because in the US, it feels like it's either you're very collaborative with your child's teacher or you have those people who feel like it's a constant push to get their child's needs met. And I'm curious as to what the culture and the expectations are for parent teacher interactions, if you have specific concerns.
Generally, the idea in France is that you like drop your kid off at school and they do their thing, and then you pick your kid up at the end of the day, and like at the end of 12 years there's like a French citizen that's like been created. So it's not super collaborative in terms of working with the teacher, parents working with the teacher. That said, certainly like I've had very good experience talking to teachers, and if I have a concern, of course I don't think they'd be super receptive to me trying to tell them what to do, which I do think some American parents do. All of the times that I've interacted with the teachers, it has been more about me wanting to have more information. And they have always, without any exception, been completely open and sort of helped me have more information and understand what was going on. But I do think that there can be a tendency in the US for parents to expect to be able to influence what's happening in the classroom. And I think that is absolutely a non-starter in France.
Like that might be something to take off your list of expectations before you even arrive.
It won't happen. It won't happen. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's kind of similar in Portugal. You might You might have conversations and receive information, but that's not your domain as a parent.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I have one more question about education. And because your daughter's 9, this may not even be on the radar yet. You mentioned that you get a French citizen at the end of 12 years of education. Is there the same push for like college attainment and standardized testing toward that end in France? I'm assuming not, but I'm curious as to whether you've encountered any of that.
Gosh, to be honest, like, yes, there's definitely a fair amount of standardized testing. In terms of like push towards college attainment, I haven't really seen it, certainly not as sort of overt as I've seen it be in the US. I will admit I have a fairly hands-off approach with my daughter. I think it fits pretty well with what's expected in France, but I may actually be even beyond what's normal in France. I don't know. You're asking me these questions and I'm realizing that like I really don't know a lot of stuff that happens at school.
Well, I mean, she's 9, so.
But yeah, they do evaluations, and the parents read the evaluations, and I certainly read the evaluations. I don't read them in depth, but basically what matters to me is like is she meeting expectations? If so, great. I sign my name and I'm not worried. The approach that I take and that I think is expected here is if something is wrong, I expect you to tell me, or as like I expect the teacher to tell me. And if something is not wrong, then everyone is happy. and and if I suspect that something is wrong, then I will ask the teacher to have a conversation. And this has happened before, and the teachers have always been happy to talk to me when that's happened.
Yeah. Okay. Hearing you talk made me think of one more education related question, and then we can kind of move on from this topic. Homework. How big of a deal is it in your daughter's school?
There's not that much homework, but she's 9. There is some, but it's not very much.
Good to know. Homework can be a lot, even in the elementary grades in some places in the US.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. You're talking about her friendships and having that peer group from the classes. What's it like parenting in France compared to your experience parenting in the US? I mean, my kids are grown, but I remember parenting, even managing like social interactions with my kids and play dates and stuff like that. It felt very parent intensive. Is it the same over there? Or is it different?
It's different, but I don't know. It's hard to compare because I was a parent in the U.S. where my daughter was younger, and now she's a little bit older. And honestly, we had trouble for reasons I can't really fully explain when we were living in Oregon. I think we both always felt a little bit like outcasts, so we kind of both needed to get out of there. And I don't have that feeling as much in Paris, so I think I don't have that feeling at all. I don't know. It's really hard for me to draw like a straight comparison. I'm not sure I can come up with an excellent response.
Okay. Well, that's a response in itself, right? That it's different enough and y'all feeling, like you're part of the community. So, one other question that I had specifically about bringing a minor child with you when you move is healthcare access. What is that like for children? Do you have to like choose a doctor or sign in with a doctor in your area? Are you in the private system? Like, what's the process for that parents bringing kids to France might expect?
I actually haven't managed this very well, but yes, theoretically, you're supposed to basically enroll your daughter or your child with a pediatrician. I actually haven't done this. I have a number of bad habits that I think are like a hangover from being Americans, and one of them is not going to the doctor very often. So,
Yeah, your perspective on healthcare gets so skewed from living in America.
yeah, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved with moving to France, and some of it is very frustrating. But healthcare costs in general are dramatically lower, and as a result, you're kind of almost like less motivated to get it all right, get all your ducks in a row, because you're like, oh, if I didn't get all the paperwork filled out, then that means it'll cost 30 euros instead of 20 euros to go to the doctor. And it just, you don't feel super motivated to make that happen. Obviously, if your child has some sort of health problem, you need to be on top of that a lot more. But if there's not any specific health problem, then quite frankly, I've talked to a lot of Americans who are much less organized about the healthcare than they should be, simply because in their mind they're making this comparison to the situation in the US, and they're like, well, I didn't even file for like reimbursement for the healthcare expenses because it just didn't seem like enough money to be worth the paperwork.
I sliced my finger open on Easter while I was chopping food, and it was bad. And I was rooting around looking for duct tape to hold the edges of this thing together. And then I remembered that I could go to the emergency room and I wasn't going to have like a $500 copay.
Mm-hmm.
But it like took me about 20 minutes to remember, oh, it's not actually a big deal to go and get this wound like professionally closed. So I wonder if that's part of it too, is that it's just so much, even the private care is less expensive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like something where the options are there, the private system is there, the public system is there. Are there any things about moving with your daughter to France that came up that were like completely unexpected that other parents might need to know about as they plan their move?
So this is just depending on what country you're going to. And what your visa category is. Some visas allow you to take dependents and others don't. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, well, some visas allow you to take dependents and others don't. In France, there is no such thing as a minor who is undocumented or doesn't have papers. So if your minor child like arrives in France, there's no such thing as like a residence permit for a minor child. They'll get a document that allows them to come and go freely from France. But as long as they're living in France and they're enrolled in school, like they have the legal right to stay. So it's just very different from the way that we think about it in the United States. But like I had a visa that allowed me to bring a dependent. So I did it 100% the completely legal way. But that's just something to understand. It was a difference in the way that the system is set up that I hadn't anticipated.
Can you talk a little bit about like the visa process and how that moved for you, like what the timeline was like?
Yeah, so every country is different, but in the case of France, you can't submit your request for a visa more than 90 days ahead of when you intend to like actually move. So there's only a certain amount of pre-planning that you can do. In my case, I had to commit to investing 30,000 euros. What that really just meant is I had to have like 30,000 euros in my bank account. And, there's a bunch of other things. I had to prove that I have a graduate degree, et cetera, et cetera. That's about it. I mean, I should probably mention I decided that I was going to move to France in mid-February, and we were on the plane at the end of May. So it was pretty fast, but that's also just because that's usually how I do things in my life.
Yeah, I remember that. I was still like in the middle of the process of waiting for my visa application appointment for Portugal, which I had decided to do like months before. And I'm like, okay, Emily decides she's moving to France. Emily has moved to France. I'm still waiting for my appointment. So it is different for every country. I'm glad that it was a fast process for you. And it sounds like things are awesome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that your daughter's thriving, doing really well.
That's true.
What's been, do you think, the biggest upside for her of making this move?
So part of it is moving to Europe, and part of it is moving from a relatively small city to a big city. So I think I've come to the realization that we are not small city people, but also just that, and part of this is our family is different and we've had some different experiences. And when we were living in a small town in Oregon, we really felt different and like outcasts.
Right.
And when I say small town, not that small. So moving to Paris, which is a capital city and has people from all over the world and people who have had all sorts of different experiences, this has been very positive for both of us because we no longer have to feel like outcasts. And that has been really good for my daughter, for me as well. But that's what I see with her and her friends. She has some friends who are French and they have a regular family life and they're completely normal. But she has a lot of friends that were also born elsewhere, or they have one or both of their parents who's from elsewhere, or they have something sort of different about their family, and there's just a lot more diversity of experience at among her friend group and among my friend group as well. And so I think that that has been really positive for both of us. You'd probably get that in a place like New York City as well, but I think that's been really positive for us.
Yeah, it's great when you can kind of find your place and you just feel like you fit there.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, switching to focus on you a little bit, maybe first about like the parenting experience. One of the things that I read with just like burning envy when my children were small is how much more social and structural support there is for parents in most European countries. And I'm reading this sitting there in Texas with my kids when they were little thinking, why can't we have that? So, I mean, is it really all that they say it is? Like, what has the experience been for you as a parent? Do you feel like you have less background noise to worry about living where you live now?
Yes, there's a couple of things. The school day is longer. And so I'm self employed and I have always made my own schedule. So this was not like I could adapt to the schedule in the US, but the school day is longer in France, which means I feel more able to take time to do things for myself during the school day and still have what I feel like is enough time to work. During vacations, there's summer camps or camps basically that are open to kids. They're not free, but there's like a spot in them is guaranteed as long as you sign up in time. There's a window of time for you to sign up. You have to sign up, and they happen at schools, not at every single school, but like a school in your neighborhood. So that means that vacations are much less disruptive. There's not this like in the US, you have to like make sure that you signed up your kid like in the first 5 minutes that sign up came open for the like limited number of camp spots. So there's not that stress either. I would say that those are the two main things. In France, the entire society is sort of organized around the school year. And so that does make it much easier as a parent. Like everything happens on the same calendar as the school system. Activities for adults. So everyone is really on the same schedule, and that schedule is the school year.
That's amazing. And yet so logical that um it's like, why don't they do that everywhere? Yeah, in Portugal, the kids go to school till like 5 or 6 in the evening, and they're not in class that whole time. Depending on their age, they have after school activities, but they're all based on the campus. And it's so that parents don't have to scramble to find that after school care like you do in many places in the US. And it just seems to work better for everybody. So let's talk, if you're cool with it, let's talk a little bit about you. You mentioned you're self-employed, and I mentioned at the beginning that you're a consultant in like open source software and startups. Can you talk about maybe a little bit about like what it's been like to be self-employed in France and building your business there?
Yeah, so I came to France on an entrepreneur's visa, and there's been a huge learning curve in terms of managing a business in France. Things like filing taxes and even there's a huge learning curve. I have not. It's been 2 years. I've not figured it out. I do not feel comfortable with the French system yet. So I still feel like I'm on the learning curve, and I guess that's the main thing that I will say. The conference that I organize is new since I moved to France, so that's also like a new part of my business. So also like a huge learning curve. Yeah, I guess that's the main thing to say is like there's so much to learn, and you don't think when you're self-employed, you don't always think about all the little things that you know about running a business that are specific to your jurisdiction, and that you learn little by little. And the feeling that I had moving to my business to France was my business was established. And so whereas when I started my independent consulting business in the US, it was like I was able to sort of build up and learn these things little by little. I felt like I was expected to already know them because of the maturity of my business, and I didn't. So it's very sort of shocking. But yeah, little by little, I guess you kind of try to figure it out.
Yeah, I was having an email back and forth with my CPA today about my business here in Portugal. And yeah, it's just like, it almost feels like there's a slow drip, for me anyway, of things that I didn't know that I didn't know.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And so you kind of have to have, I guess, that mindset of you're going to be continuously learning, and the timeline for learning some of this stuff may be more accelerated than you would be comfortable with, but you got to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for you, organizing this conference, can you maybe, if you want, talk a little bit about like what's it like building a business in a different business culture? What's that been like for you?
Ooh, I don't know.
I mean, maybe you're just that sort of naturally chill, like cross-culturally fluent person who like nails it,
I
but
mean, I can give you a good cross-cultural example that's actually not about me. Organized this conference with a colleague who's based in Luxembourg. He's a French guy who has never worked in France. He's worked in India, he's worked in the Netherlands, he's never worked in France. He lives in Luxembourg now. And I mean, when I first moved to France, so yeah, everyone says like you should address people formally. It's a more formal business culture, blah, blah, blah. But I work in tech, and it was very obvious to me from the beginning that this is not how you talk to people in tech. Anyway, I think that my colleague, I think he messed this up in a couple interactions around the conference. More like it, but I saw it, and like he was too formal, and it actually, I think, created some problems for us. I'm sure there's other stuff that I've done that he saw that was like horrible. But I think that's a good example. I mean, when I first moved to France, I was like not sure like what's the difference in formality level, given that like I work in tech. But I think that's the other thing to keep in mind is that you move to a different country, but each sort of industry has its own culture, and the level of formality in like the French tech scene is not the same as if you work in like publishing or if you work in like the luxury industry or something like that. And I've had this conversation. I have a friend who's American who works in publishing, and I had this conversation with her. I mean, she was like, no, all of my clients are like very uptight, and we're very formal with each other. And I was like, yeah, no, that doesn't work in tech. That would be very weird. I think that's the thing to keep in mind is that there are cultural differences inside of the country, inside of a culture, and you have to understand what industry you're working into. The French tech industry is probably going to have more in common with like the American tech industry than with the luxury industry that's in the office next door.
interesting. So it's basically just reading the room, it sounds like, for whatever industry you're working in within that culture.
Yeah, I don't think it's reading the room necessarily, but understanding the industry that you're working in. I mean, if you've always worked in a certain industry in the US, chances are that it's going to be relatively similar in another country. Maybe, I mean, I guess maybe not, but there's, each industry has its own codes. And I think especially between the US and Europe, there's going to be a huge amount of overlap among like if we're talking about the same industry.
That makes sense. That's good to know. So, is there anything that you would recommend that either parents with children or people who are making a move with their own, business or self-employed status, any things that you recommend that people do or research or just think about before they commit to making an international move?
Yes. So I'm not going to make this specific to having children or or being self-employed. The thing that I see people making the biggest mistake about moving abroad that I see people making, Americans, is first of all, they're not moving necessarily to a place. They don't have a strong reason to move to a particular place. And like they don't really have any sort of connection with that country. And I find those people tend to be less happy after they've moved and more likely to move back to the US. And I think that there's also a huge amount of naivete about moving to Europe that really drives me nuts in conversations with Americans. So I'm going to go into politics here. If you are thinking about leaving the US because you hate the politics in the US, you want to make sure that you actually pay attention to politics in Europe, because it's not always better than whatever you don't like about politics in the US. So I think that level of naivete is sort of frustrating to me sometimes, because some people think that like the Europe is like a socialist utopia where everything is wonderful, and then they discover that some things are wonderful and some things maybe are not nearly as wonderful as they expected. So that's another piece of advice that I would have.
Yeah, be clear. And also understand that Europe is not a monolithic culture or government or society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I actually saw someone, this was an online forum, they were complaining about politics in the US, which, understandable. But their solution was they were going to capitalize on their ability to claim Hungarian citizenship by descent and move to Hungary. And like thinking it was going to be different. And I'm like, those are closer than you may realize. Like they hadn't done their homework.
Exactly.
And they were just thinking about getting out instead of, as you said, like moving to somewhere. So yeah, you have to know where you're going, understand it, what you expect, and why you're moving to that specific place. So I'm going to ask you, why Paris then? Why Paris for you?
Well, because I went to graduate school in Paris. I already had some of a network in Paris, but the year I spent in Paris was probably the happiest year of the first part of my adulthood, shall we say. And I had always intended to go back. So basically, I spent a year in Paris already. I had already felt like it was sort of my place, quote unquote. And that's why I decided to come back.
That's awesome. And I'm so happy that it's going well for you and your daughter, because I remember when you were planning it. So again, thank you for making time to talk with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's all for now. Thank you for listening to We're Moving to Europe, a podcast for Americans who are curious and or serious about relocating to a European country. I'm your host, Casey Kelly. Our producer and editor is Magdalena Lass, and our music was composed by Sage Barton. For more resources and to join the conversation, connect with us on Substack at We're Moving to Europe.